Our guest is Maggie Steber. And if you don't have a notepad out, take a moment and be sure that you get a notepad out, because knowledge from Maggie Steber just flows. It just happens, and it's going to happen today. To give you a little introduction to what you're in for, and as an introduction to who our guest is, Maggie Steber is a Guggenheim Foundation Fellow, documentary photographer who has worked in 70 countries, photographing humanistic stories on a wide range of topics, most notably her 3 decades of work in Haiti, as well as projects on Native Americans and the science behind memory loss. Her list of honors include the Leica Medal of Excellence, recognition from the World Press Foundation, the Overseas Press Club, the Medal of Honor for Distinguished Service to Journalism from the University of Missouri. In 2013, she was named as one of 11 Women of Vision by National Geographic magazine, which resulted in a show and a traveling exhibition. In 2019, she had a very good year. She was a finalist for the Pulitzer and received the Lucy Award for photojournalism. Her photographs are included in the American Women Collection at the Library of Congress, the Guggenheim Foundation, and she is a member emeritus with the 7 Photo Agency. It is my pleasure to introduce you all and to Maggie, and thank you, Maggie, for being with us today.
Oh my, hello everybody. My goodness, there's so many of you. And how wonderful, how wonderful, how wonderful. So great. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, absolutely. And thank you for being with us. Maggie, you know, there is so much work that we could show and fill far more than just the hour that we have. And, you know, the title of this workshop, I believe was something about still life, exploring still lives, which we will get to. But I know we'd be remiss in looking at your body of work. Let's just bring up a few images here. If I didn't start, rather than looking through, you know, every project that you've worked on, which would take us far longer than the time we've got, what I thought I might do is ask you to talk to us about the stories behind a few images that really were turning points in your career. Let me start with this first image.
Okay, this is from Haiti, and it was taken just before the fall of a 30-year dictatorship in Haiti. And I had read something in the New York Times that there were food riots going on, and having been to Haiti before, the fact that people were demonstrating was really remarkable, because there was a very fierce secret police in Haiti, and very dangerous. And so I was covering this very peaceful march in Cap Haitian, which is in the north of Haiti, and suddenly everybody ran and covered this warehouse where all this food aid was kept, like ants on a piece of candy. And people were breaking in and fighting over bags of rice and tins of oil and all kinds of things. And finally the army came and the police, and they started trying to beat everybody. Now this looks like an isolated incident, but in fact, it was total chaos all over, and completely 360 degrees around me. And this is the days of film. So I was just shooting like a mad woman, and you never know what you're gonna get. So you really had to shoot a lot. And so I got this picture unbeknownst to me, but I sent the film back to New York, where I lived, and I had an agent there. What was great about this is that finally the soldiers pulled back and let the people have the food, because this food was meant for them, but they were never getting it because it was sold on the black market. And the price of food had gone so high that people were starving to death. So anyway, US News and World Report ran this picture, and then it won the Leica Medal of Excellence and some other things. And actually it changed my career. I've always been a little,
No, go ahead, yeah.
Well, awards are really wonderful, recognition, and I'm very grateful for them. But I always think it's sad that sometimes that's what it takes to move you forward. I guess that's just how the world works, but there's so much beautiful work that never is awarded. And I always think, why does it take an award for us to really appreciate it? But anyway, that's an aside. That's just a little personal
Maggie,
thing.
let me click. We're gonna jump ahead to another story that you covered in Haiti, and I really think it's a good illustration of something that you've done throughout your career, and I think it speaks also to what we're going to talk about later on in our talk today. In this idea of finding a new way to tell a story, and it's often on the fringes of where everyone else is making a picture.
Yeah, because that's sometimes where the best stuff happens. And I learned that a long time ago from a New York Times photographer, a woman who would always work on the fringes of things, and she always had the best pictures. But I was covering, in 2010, there was this horrible, horrible earthquake in Haiti that really changed Haiti forever. And over 350,000 people were killed, and 1 million people were left homeless for 5 years. And so there were all these journalists and photographers, and everybody was photographing. Just, it was horrible, horrible. It was like the end of the world. And I was heartbroken. And I just felt like I wasn't doing anything very good. And then I remembered that the main street in downtown Port-au-Prince, which is the lifeline that leads to the north and to the south, and is a very important, it is also the main lifeline to the economy. And it's a very important historical street, and it had been completely destroyed. And so I grabbed the wonderful writer I was working with, because I was there for the New York Times, and I said, let's go down and photograph Grand Rue, this big street is what it was called. And so we did this thing where I would photograph and then move over a few feet and photograph and do the whole side, one side of the street. And we put it together in a grid, and online you could stroll down the street and see the amount of damage, because that was what was so difficult, to get this sense of how much was destroyed in one picture. And so that won an award, not for me, but for the designers, but bless their hearts, they really did something great. And yeah, so sometimes you think because you worked in a place so long that you should be on top of it and know exactly what to do, but it was heartbreaking. There were so many distractions, so many journalists, people were looking for riots. It was a terrible time, and I just thought, oh, this work I've done for years, it should inform what I'm doing now, and it wasn't. And then suddenly, the light went off, and I did something very different.
Well, Maggie, we will put a link to this story because it still can be accessed on the New York Times website. So we'll put a link to this in the chat window because it's a beautiful way to be able to get a sense of the catastrophe. And it's also a very unique way in terms of telling the story. And how many pictures did you end up sending over the wire?
Over 350. So it was a satellite phone. So, I was just sending them individually because you couldn't put this together and then send it. It would be, it was impossible. So the designers stayed up all night and put it together. It was wonderful.
Well, I'll use a quote from you, and credit where credit's due. I took this from the Candid Frame, where you gave it a really in-depth interview with Iberian X, and the quote here I've got is, at some point I realized I was only shooting the worst thing, and I needed to go back when it was quiet. And you started to focus on the beauty and mystery in Haiti.
Yes, and that's really what I look for now when I go. But there was so much going on for the first 5 or 6 years that I was working there, because this 30-year dictatorship had fallen, and there were attempts at elections, very, very violent, a lot of violence. People were really struggling, and there was a big change socially and politically, and you have to cover those things because they're part of history. But then I realized I'm only telling one aspect of the story, and this is something we do all the time. In newspapers or magazines, if it bleeds, it leads. And nobody ever goes when it's quiet to say, here's the other side of Haiti, which is magical and beautiful. And so I started to do that because that's the real Haiti. And what we photograph are things that happen all over the world, depending on what's going on. But that should not describe a land or a culture or a people. It's not fair. And I think it really makes us think that that's what people are about. Like in Haiti, there's just been a lot of violence and based on a lot of political machinations. But the people are amazing. They're beautiful. And there's so much magic in the air. And it's my favorite country, actually.
Why do you think of Haiti as a woman?
Well, first of all, because the women do everything. Haiti would not function if it weren't for the women, and these are such strong women. And in Haiti, you would say they were the potomitan, and the potomitan is a way of paying honor to somebody and saying they're the ones who are holding up the tent. And the women really make the country function in ways that are surprising, and not just in Haiti, but I think that's true all over the world. Oh my, yes.
Well, Meg, I can't think of a more appropriate transition to, you're most famous for this work in Haiti and your dedication to telling stories of people at both tragic moments and also moments of beauty. And but I think you're unique in the world of photography that you also have turned the lens on your personal life, and specifically I'm referring to this project on your mother.
Oh yes. Thanks for showing this work, because it's really my favorite work. I think a lot of people use photography to photograph their personal issues and lives, and I really, really think it's an important thing to do, and especially if you're having any problems or, we ask people to be vulnerable before us when we're photographing them. We want them to open up and show us everything. And I think we should also be vulnerable before the camera. And photographing my mother was a scientist. She was really eccentric, brilliant, eccentric woman. And I'm an only child with an only parent. And so I just had to find a way to be the warrior for my mother as she lost her memory, and for myself as well. And so I decided I would be the warrior. I would photograph my mother, and I would use the camera as my shield and fight to make sure that her end of life experience was the most beautiful that I could make it. And so there's a lot of downtime spent with people who are older and going through this. And so I just spent so much time with her over a 9-year period, and I was constantly photographing her. And I think it was the first time I could actually look at her in various situations and really look at her. And sometimes to be very frank, I think sometimes I was photographing her when she was sleeping. So I would be prepared when she was dead. I was looking at her and thinking, this is what she'll look like when she's dead. And just to get myself accustomed to it. But at the same time, she was so beautiful. This is my very favorite picture of my mama. My mother was half Cherokee, and in this picture, I think she so looks it. And I fell in love with her, I mean, because it was just my mother and I, and sometimes mothers and daughters butt heads a lot. And she was very eccentric and very strict, but it gave me a whole new way to see her, and I discovered things I never knew before about her, which just made me fall in love with her all over again.
Maggie, you grew up as an only child in Austin, Texas, and you went to the University of Texas in Austin. You studied with Gary Winogrand.
Gary Winogrand and Russell Lee, who was an Armed Security Administration photographer, but he was very old, but he was an amazing teacher. He would give us liquor on Fridays. We would go to his house and he would give us liquor. And then we would go have Mexican food. All right.
I just want to ask you, you famously, when you applied for one of your first jobs in journalism, and the editor of a small town paper told you, no, we're not hiring women at this time, you said, give me 24 hours, and went out and enterprised a story, took the pictures, wrote the story, and delivered it at 9 o'clock the next morning and got the job.
And I got the job. And he was not happy to see me when I went back the next morning because he said, Miss, I told you we're not hiring a woman. And I said, well, I did this and I just would like for you to see it. And not only did he hire me, but he ran the story and the pictures in the paper the next day because it was an issue that they had not reported on. And it was something everybody in the town was talking about. So,
Well, Maggie, I'm curious,
so much fun.
coming off the pictures we just saw of your mother, what was it, two questions. What is it you credit your mother with teaching you? And then also, how did you change as a photographer after doing that project?
My mother taught me how to work in a man's world without feeling that I had to be a man. And she taught me how to be very strong. And she taught me that you don't keep butting your head up against the wall, you find a way around it. And so those are and that's what I do. And I really hope people take that to heart because there's always a way around something if you give it thought and you really try to imagine it in a different way. And what was the other part of the question?
How did documenting your mother during this time, her battle with dementia over several years, how did it change your approach as a photographer in stories you did following this?
I really like intimacy, and I've always been somebody who likes to photograph up close and have a relationship with people that I'm photographing so that it's almost collaborative in a sense. But I think doing this work made me slow down a little bit and also made me realize that the kinds of stories I wanted to tell were very personal and much more personal. And so I think it changed my interest, and also it made me more interested in science. Sorry. Yeah.
What? And do you feel like, can you draw a parallel between documenting your own family and then having this assignment?
Well, I think, sure. Actually, the work on my mother got me this 3-year assignment with National Geographic on face transplants. And we followed this young woman, Katie, who had shot her face off in a suicide attempt. And by some miracle, it didn't kill her. But I guess what I learned from photographing my mother was that you just really have to spend a lot of time with people, and you have to also, there are times when you don't take pictures, but you're there. And it also made me really revere science because my mother was a scientist. This is Katie after she got a new face. So the doctors took part of her thigh and her stomach and made a piecemeal face, like a temporary face. And then she had to go through multiple surgeries. This was over a 3-year period in preparation for the possibility of somebody donating a face. Now, people donate organs all the time. I'm an organ donator. It's on my driver's license. But very few people will give the face of a loved one because there's something about the face that's about identity. But this grandmother, whose granddaughter overdosed with drugs, decided after the doctors talked to her, because her granddaughter was brain dead and she was not coming back, to give Katie a new face. And this is about 6 months after the face transplant. And her parents were such warriors for her. They learned everything. They had to stop teaching. They were teachers and they had to learn everything. They could be doctors now. They learned everything about face transplants. And this was at Cleveland Clinic, and the Department of Defense paid for everything because there are so many service people coming back from Afghanistan with terrible disfigurements. And so they wanted the Cleveland Clinic, which has done a lot of face transplants, to move that science forward. So Katie benefited from that. But her parents were warriors, and they were insisting that their daughter get the best of everything, and they really became very close to the doctors. And so the last time I went to see them, I had been thinking about how can I tell this story about warriors that the parents were. So I talked to them for a while about it, and I said, I have this idea, and I wonder if you would be willing to do it. And so I told them, and they were, and they just laid down on the bed and they caressed their daughter, and I stood over them and I photographed it. And yeah, I think it's a lovely salute to them. And Katie was a lucky girl. So,
well, Maggie, we're going to switch gears, and I'm using this as a transition for us into getting to this conversation about the Secret Garden and the project that you were awarded the Guggenheim for. But before we get there, I want to take you back to a time when you shot some fashion. And
yes.
Can you give us the ideas behind these images?
Well, I grew up by myself, and I was always in a lot of plays from the time I was 6 until after I graduated from university. So I loved stories and I loved costume. And so I started photographing fashion just on assignment to do runway fashion, you know, when the haute couture, the big fashion shows happen in New York. And then I started going backstage, and I would stay backstage during these fashion shows because it's so much more interesting. And then I showed that work to a very beautiful magazine, Connoisseur, and they loved it. And so they started giving me assignments. They said, you go out and find the story and we'll let you photograph it. So then I really was very excited. And I found the last American glove maker quite by accident because I was walking down Fifth Avenue in New York, and I love gloves. And so I saw this window filled with gloves, and so I went in and talked to the lady, and so I took some Polaroids of the gloves, and I went back to the magazine and I said, so I'd like to do this story about these college girls who have graduated, but they're having a reunion. And so there's a lot of hand action. And we can do the story on gloves. And they loved the idea. So we rented a very fancy restaurant and we spent the day there. And the picture editor had a beautiful sister, and every one of her friends was beautiful. So we used them as models because they really got on so well, and they had actually been friends in university. So we had so much fun.
You know, Maggie, there's a recurring theme, and we're going to use this as a transition into talking about the Secret Garden, where you have mined your personal life, both as an example for pictures and inspiration for projects. What was the story behind this image?
I was doing a story on memory, the science of memory, for National Geographic magazine. And at the same time, my mother was losing her memory. So I decided, because of that I could personalize this story. And in fact, the magazine gave me 2 pages to write an homage to my mother. And I really appreciated that. But I was going all over the country and photographing aspects of memory and memory loss, memory loss is one thing that you can get to photographically, but the idea of memory and how it's everything that we are, it describes us. Everything that we are is built on memory. So I had all these old family photos of my mama's family and her growing up and her holding me as a baby. And I love these pictures. They're very cherished objects. And I decided that I would try to do a still life using these pictures. And actually, when I talked to the magazine about it, they said that could make a beautiful cover. And in fact, this was the cover in the end. But I just put the pictures together and I kept moving them around and changing them. And I made sure that I had a picture of my mother when she was 17 right in the middle because she's so beautiful. And then I just used one light and I put a lace curtain in front of it to kind of mottle the light, and it worked.
Well, Maggie, we're getting some questions about gear, so we'll touch on the gear question for just a moment. I'll you know what? We'll see a big screen here before we talk about the garden. I have yet another quote from you, which is that relates to gear, and that is at some point. Let's see. I'm fond of saying, I'm just the transportation for the camera. I carry my camera around and it tells me where to stop and take a picture. And what do you expand on that? How does that work?
Well, I'm a Leica photographer, and I really love these cameras, and because they make me feel more confident. And when I was a young photographer, and there were not so many women. When I would walk into the room with my Leicas, people treated me very differently, because women used to be kind of, oh, who's this, you know, treated like that. Sometimes they're not taken seriously, I guess. So the Leicas made a difference, but also, especially with the M's, they're such small little things, and people don't always know what they are, so they think it's just an old camera, and that makes people more comfortable as well. But I think they make me a better photographer, and I like to think they're my partners in crime, so to speak. Like I don't feel, you know, photographing is a very solitary sort of thing, and I just always feel like my little buddies are with me. So, and I think they make me a better photographer because I really, they're simple to use for me. They're very simple. And I'm not somebody who uses a lot of bells and whistles. I like to keep everything pretty simple. But I love,
Maggie,
I love
we're
it.
getting questions in addition to the gear questions. We're getting some questions about how one keeps, in terms of self-care, in terms of your emotional state, and you get very involved both in terms of research and in the time that you spend with all of your subjects. And the creation of the Secret Garden of Lily LaPalma, you actually took on an alter ego, and
Yes.
I'd venture to say some of that had to do with self-care and also reinventing yourself as a photographer. As we look at a few pictures from the Secret Garden, can you give us the backstory?
I'm very happy to do it because I'm trying to start a secret garden movement in the world. So yes, when you're a photographer and covering certain things, I've covered war and a lot of suffering around various countries, 70 countries. I've also covered a lot of beauty and happy stories too, but so you're seeing a lot of suffering and you just have to push it to the back of your mind so you can keep going. But at some point it spills out. And I think also going through the 9 years of memory loss with my mother, just that was, I don't want to say it was traumatic, but it was emotionally very challenging sometimes. Just to see your only family disappearing before your eyes is tough. So also I can say happily, I've been in this business for a long time, and now there's all these beautiful new younger photographers coming in, and I'm all for them because we need fresh water in the pond. I welcome them and I mentor a lot of them, and I find that I love their energy, and they're telling stories in new ways that always intrigues me as well, because I've been a picture editor and a director of photography too. So I love looking at pictures, but I started taking pictures that were very unlike what I normally do in my documentary work. And they're sort of like the pictures I took when the first time I ever picked up a camera. I would make these really strange pictures. And my teachers would always say, well, if you really want to be a photographer, you can't take pictures like this. You'll never make a living. So I put it aside. But what happened was that I thought, okay, so here are these beautiful young people, but I still need to work. So I need to reinvent myself. So how am I going to do that? Because I'm known for certain things, but I do a lot more than that. So I started succumbing, I guess, to this desire to start making very different images. And I decided to create this secret garden where I could plant new ideas and nobody would know about them, because people can sometimes crush your ideas. They can say, oh, that's been done a million times, or oh, that's not good, or you can't sell that. And you can't always share your ideas with people. So I thought, let me plant them in a secret garden nobody knows about, but there needs to be a mistress of the garden who takes care of these little ideas that are trying to break up through the ground. And so I've always loved this idea of an alter ego.
And Meg, you are one of our most popular, you're a very popular instructor worldwide, and through the Leica Academy, you often have taught a mystery workshop. And
mystery, yes, a mystery workshop, yes.
And speak to your feelings about the Secret Garden in terms of your advice to other photographers.
Okay, well, so I created this alter ego, Lily LaPalma, and part of the idea of the Secret Garden is you can put work there and do work, and you don't have to care what anybody thinks. It's not for them, it's for you. And this is so important because we're so sensitive about what people think about our work. And this place is about mystery. So you can do anything in the garden, anything can happen in the garden, anything can exist in the garden. And that allows your imagination and your fantasy to really blossom. And imagination and ideas are the most important things a photographer can have, because you're having to figure out how to tell an old story in a new way, for example. So in creating mystery workshops, we would invite people to come in and say, okay, this is what you do for a living, or this is what you normally do, but we're asking you to throw that aside for the moment and fall in love with the idea of mystery, in which case anything, you can photograph anything. And we would try to show them where mystery is all around you if you bother to look at it. And I think sometimes we don't delve into that. And sometimes it's very deep stuff in us that we can address, or you could just look at how light and shadow can be interpreted as love and loss, or life and death, or any number of things. So the idea is to create a mystery and a mood and just liberate yourself from what other people think about it. Because in the end, we only get to live once. And if we always give the power of how we're going to live over to other people, I'm not sure we ever really find true happiness. And I think that as children, if you think back as children, our imaginations are wild and vivid and creative. And if you think about it, we lose that as adults because we have to work and we have to be disciplined and we have to worry about what people think. And so what the Secret Garden does is it allows you to imagine anything and to be wild and to not care what anybody thinks. And in so doing, I guess I was kind of reborn in a way. And I'm so happy. It's the happiest I have been in photography for a long, long time. And I just don't care if anybody likes it. But I also get to some bad things that have happened to me in my life, even as a child, I could deal with by using photography. And so this picture is called Ophelia, because growing up alone, I read a lot of Shakespeare. I really loved Hamlet. I loved Ophelia. It's a very strong female character in Hamlet, but I was so mad at her because she drowned herself. So I was with some people and we went swimming in a lake and I took this picture. So a lot of times I'm just walking along. I don't really plan these things. I'm just in the moment and things happen in front of me and I photograph them.
And Maggie, how often does the title for these pieces does it normally come after the image is created, or does the title come to you before?
Both, but generally speaking, it's the title that comes to me, and that is what then I'm inspired by.
And could you talk about how are you inspired by your dreams? I went to this image on purpose.
Oh, well, I used to have a recurring nightmare from the time I was a little girl until I was a young adult, like 35, being chased by a dark figure with a knife. And there's all kinds of, I can't think of the word. Anyway, suggestions about what that means, but anyway, and sometimes the figure would catch me and stab me and I would wake up, and other times I would just barely escape. And actually I went to a therapist once and for something else, and I mentioned this dream to her, and she told me to see the figure and embrace it. And I thought, oh, this is so silly. And she said, just do it. And so I did it, and I never had the dream again. And she said, so you know what that was? Those were your fears. And when you embrace your fears, you conquer them. And I thought, wow, that's just, why couldn't I think of that? But so sometimes they're based on dreams, or there's sometimes the things that happen to me, things that I see, or somebody tells me a story about something that happened to them, or I'll be in the bathtub, and I always keep a camera close to the bathtub, because anything can happen in the bathtub, and sometimes you get some really nice pictures. So,
Very good. Well, Maggie, I want to just take a moment for anyone that is joining us now. We are speaking with documentary photographer Maggie Steber, coming to us from Miami and sharing not only her history in photography, philosophy behind the image she makes, but we are getting ready to go a little deeper into the secret garden. And specifically, Maggie, I've got to ask you, what's the deal with lizards?
All right, now people are going to think, okay, this woman is really dark. Well, I do have a dark side, but so I live in Miami. It's lovely here. I have a garden. I have the secret garden, but I have a real garden. And there's lots of lizards here. And I have cats. And sadly, sometimes the cats catch the lizards and bite them. They don't actually eat them, which is very sad to me. I mean, not that I want the cats to eat the lizards, but they just kill them for meanness. And so a few years ago, I don't know why, I just started collecting these dead lizards. Or lizards get in the house and they die because there's nothing, no way out, or there's nothing to eat. Anyway, or lizards come in and they lay their eggs, and so little babies are born. And if I can catch them, I do, but sometimes they hide and I can't. So I just started collecting these lizards, and I thought, okay, I don't know what this is about, but I'm going with it. So I would wrap them in foil. I would let them dry out a little bit. Or if they were fresh kills and they weren't smelly, I would wrap them in foil and number them, and I would put them in my freezer. And so as a consequence, the only thing in my freezer are foil wrapped lizards and a big bottle of vodka in case they want to party. And so I use them as the sentries of the secret garden. So I thought, oh, this is how I'll use the lizards. They'll be the army, the secret army for the secret garden. So they're the dead lizards army. But they have their own life. Besides guarding the secret garden and reporting into Lily, which they do on occasion, they have their own little life. And so I've kind of done this offshoot of the secret garden where the lizards have their own life. Like this is the love bed. So these are lizards making love. And
Maggie, how we're getting some questions in terms of social media, and you're very active on Instagram. In fact, if no one does anything else from this talk, go and follow Maggie. I'll give you her, in fact, we'll put it in the comments, Maggie's Instagram. But some of the questions are, how do you resist the temptation to show work immediately? You know, you worked on the secret garden for a while before you shared it with anyone. And how, can you give us a sense of when do you know it's the right time to introduce the project?
I use ballet growing up, my mother raised me by herself. We really didn't have a lot of money, but my mother made sure that I had certain things that would give me confidence. And one of them was that I got to study ballet, and the other one was I learned classical piano. And so with both of those things, you know that you don't go to Carnegie Hall to play until you're ready. But in ballet as well, until you can really do a big leap across the stage, or you can dance on toe shoes, you're not ready. So why expose yourself? So I use that as a kind of metaphor for knowing that. And also there's something about saving things so that when you do come out with them, there's not just one, but there's a whole, like 20. So there's a lot of pictures of the Dead Lizards Army, and I'm still photographing that because the army continues to grow. But I just thought there's also little stories. Like this is the queen lizard on her bed, and this is the Air Force, the Dead Lizard Army Air Force, and this is one of the few pictures that I photoshopped. I don't Photoshop anything into the pictures, but I did this because I wanted to have a flying lizard. So these are, yeah.
Maggie, what role does playfulness play in for you in the creation of these images and in the silencing of the critic that we all have in our head that tells you that the images are not good enough or I'm not ready? How do you quiet those voices as you're working on a project?
Well, I've always been very playful, and since my mother was eccentric, I think I'm a bit eccentric, but I think I'm a playful person, and I embrace the child in myself. And I think sometimes we get that smashed out of us. We're told, oh, it's time to grow up, and you have to be an adult now, and you have to be responsible. And yeah, I think you can be all of those things, but you have to hold on to some part of yourself as a child, because that's where your imagination lives. And again, if you're going to be any kind of creative person, you have to be able to tap into your child, the child in you, and not worry so much about what people think. Really, if you think about it, who cares what people think? I mean, there's a lot of stupid, mean people in the world, and I hate to say it, but we all know that, and you just can't give them power over you and what you're going to create and how you're going to feel about yourself. You cannot do that.
Well, that's a great segue into what you are doing now. And I think great inspiration for people who are, many of the over 500 people who are listening to us today are at home. And so thank you for joining us. And we want to, in the time we've got left, leave you with some specific inspiration and actionable creative suggestions that you can do at home. And, we're going to talk about still lives, and we're actually going to dissect after looking at lizards, maybe I shouldn't say dissect. We're going to, I don't know, we're going to look at the anatomy of a still life, one of Maggie's still lives. But Maggie, for you, still life isn't just setting up some lights on a table. You also carry it over to these images.
Yes, because look, you know what this coronavirus has done is made us stop and slow down. And because we're at home, it gives us a chance to really look around at things. I mean, the lizards taught me how to look at small things, look at the small world around us. And so now that we've been home, and I just recently did this like last week. So we have these little garden spiders. They're tiny. They're like little crab spiders. They're teeny tiny. And they build these huge webs that are just hanging from in air. And so I took a picture of this one, and then I have these beautiful broadleaf palms, and the light and the shadow is hitting them. So I took a picture because the shadow, usually you'll find a lot of cyan, the color cyan in shadow. And then I have these plants, and I thought, oh, well, so I wanted to make a triptych that spoke to the idea of what I found in the garden. And they're small things that we don't always stop to look at. And the one on the right is a love story between a succulent and a desert rose. So I love it. It's a love story.
The titles always get me in your work. And we're going to go and look at a few more examples of your still lives. But what is the process for you in collecting objects? Talk a little bit about that. Where are the objects coming from, and how do you bring them all together? Do you set up a scene first, or do you photograph the collection?
I just collect things as I go along. If I see a pretty leaf, I'll collect it, and if it dries, that's all right. I collect little bird eggs that are broken. I'll collect wishbones, chicken wishbones, or I'll collect little pods, and anyway, just anything that captures my eye. And then I lay them out as in that previous picture, because I think if you're going to be making still lifes, you have to lay everything out to see, what do I have that I can use? So it's like a recipe. So here's all the ingredients. Now I'm going to make something. And then if you go to the next picture, this is flora from the garden. So this is part of the secret garden. And you have a dragonfly, and you have this little thing that looks like a lizard, but it's not. And there's a little bit of an egg, and there's a feather, and there's all of these leaves and dried out things. And so I just think they're so beautiful.
And so you're trying them to in different combinations.
Yes.
You bring them all together. You make a shot to see how they look as photographed after they're photographed,
Right.
And then you do different combinations.
Yes, I move things around. So this I made the other day, and I really just wanted it to be a very mute color, partly because this moment we're in is very sad, and so I didn't want to make something too colorful. But so I just used a few things because I also liked the emptiness of it. So, it's really a lot of fun. And then but I also love putting everything out on the table, because it's like if you were a kid and you brought all the toys out to look at. And lately I've been buying these little cheap toys at the dollar store. They're just $1 each. And so giant lizards and horses with wings, and but most of the stuff I collect is natural, and it's just things I find, feathers, and so I'm constantly collecting things. And I love this because I wanted to make something with all these weird little toys. So I just put them out to see how they related to each other. And was I going to make something about visiting? Maybe the lizards would visit the land of the giants, for example, because they wanted to have a little adventure, And then I also like to use family photographs and use some of these things to make something beautiful that's like an homage. And this is my mama again, and a photo booth picture of my mother and I when I was 10. We went to New York to meet my father for the first time. I was meeting my father for the first time. And the other picture is in Austin. When I was a little girl, we were walking downtown, and there used to be these people who would just take pictures, and then sell them to you. So.
Maggie, we're going to go a couple of specific technical questions, and then everyone, we're going to take a look behind the scenes to see Maggie's setup for these shots. But a specific question is, how did you get these objects or these dried flowers to look like they're floating?
Oh, this is so much fun. So I have a dining room table. It's a glass top. Okay. Now I never serve food on it because I gave up. I'm just not a good cook. So, but what I do is I'll put paper underneath it, or fabric sometimes. And of course you have to clean the glass, but by doing that, you create this sense of things floating, and you can see the shadows beneath that are cast by when you light things. So you get this three-dimensional feel to the pictures. And I love the idea that they look like they're floating. And I think that's really kind of beautiful. So there's my table, and there's, I sometimes use more than one light, but I also use, they can't see me now, but I'll show them another little set of lights.
Go ahead, they can see it. Go show them what
these are the dearest little lights. Can you see them? They're called Lume Cube. And look, they're like little lights. Let me turn one on, because they get brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter. Or you can do a flash like that. And it comes with little barn doors or a snoot like this, so you can really focus the light. So these are really great. But if you can't afford that, and they're not cheap, you can also use a little flashlight and a couple of little flashlights, just to light things. See that? Okay. So anyway.
So in terms of that setup, we've got a Dynalight there, but more often than not, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you're using available light versus a typical studio setup.
I love the available light, and my table is right next to, I have French doors all across the front of my house, and they face east. So the morning sun just pours in on that table, but I have to be really fast and set things up. So I try to set things up, but there's a little bit of a sense of, there's the little lume light, but the natural light is so glorious and beautiful. And I love, it's so warm, and I think it's kind of hard to duplicate. You can, but it's not as rich and authentic.
We're going to get to,
so this is the sunlight.
This is sunlight. And, we looked at such dense pictures, but you also are working, you're making pictures with a lot of depth with just a few, one light or available light and a few objects.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. You can take absolutely. So if you don't have lizards, or you don't go out and, you live in New York City and it's hard to find things unless you go to the park, which you can't do now, I guess. I'm not sure. But, or wherever you live, there's always things around you. And even things that you own, like little trinkets that you may own, or something that really means something to you. Or let's say that you go traveling and you buy little, like I always buy fans. I'm a big fan of fans, and I think they're so feminine. So I'm always buying fans. But I went to Vietnam. I've been there a few times, and I was in Hanoi, and so I bought these postcards and these beautiful silk fans, and so I just made this little travel still life, and I think that's really pretty. And I'm not a good cook, but I love kitchen utensils, and I loved the work of this woman, Jan Groover, who's sadly not with us anymore, but she would use all kinds of things like this to make small still lifes. And her work is in the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. So she was highly revered. But I think kitchen utensils are so beautiful and designed so beautifully. And this I just made with one light. And you can abstract things. And that's what I really like about it. So you can just use one light and some kitchen utensils and look at what you can make. It's fun to challenge yourself. And so I'm working on this series of kitchen utensils, and I'm going to write a little story. I also love to write. So sometimes I write little short stories about, I'm going to write a little mystery story about the kitchen utensils, and maybe it's going to be about at night, they come out of the drawers and they dance around, or I don't know. I haven't quite formulated it yet, but.
And Maggie, you know, I've quoted you back. I've been quoting you back to yourself a number of times. So as we start to wrap up towards the end here, you have often spoken to this idea about that photography has the power to save us.
I think
What do you mean by that? And what does that mean to you?
Well, I have to say, when I was photographing my mother, it saved me. It saved me. I could just be a puddle on the floor and useless and heartbroken, and it saved me because it gave me a way to really look at my mother and see her in a whole different way. And I had experiences with her with the camera that were fascinating, and it saved me. And I think also it saved me from maybe a life I would have had instead of the life I was supposed to have, I think.
Festival that a colleague of yours, Carl
Just
described Maggie as a beacon and in the world of photography. And I think that no better description could be made because you know, you have made a life in photography, but a life that is dedicated to revealing the stories of others and at the service of the people in your pictures. But you also do that within the photography industry, and you know, you describe yourself sometimes as a wild horse and a warrior, and you are both. But I appreciate that you, and I know the audience does appreciate that you have taken the time to share an insight into your creative process, into the way that you see the world. And I want to bring up a slide here so that people know how they can stay in touch with you.
Oh, okay. Can I just say something? Thank you to the 533 people who tuned in. Bless your hearts. It's very moving. Thank you. I'm very honored. Very honored. Thank you.
Well, we want to use this opportunity of have an audience here to let you know the very first announcement that for the first time, Maggie's going to offer a virtual workshop related to a lot of the topics we touched on today. It's a story in miniature and exploring visual narratives through still life. We're going to do this on May 14th through the 16th. It will be limited to 12 people as a virtual workshop. And if you are interested, please reach out to me through the Akademie at Leica Camera USA, and we will make sure those who tuned in are the first to find out and have the chance to sign up for this workshop when it's posted.
Tom, could I just add something to that?
Please.
Do you mind if I just add something to that?
Absolutely.
So it is a still life workshop, but you can tell a very big story with very small things. And it can be something very serious as well. It can be something that you're dealing with. It could be a comment on this moment that we're going through with this virus. It could be a number of things. So just so you think we're not just going to photograph kitchen utensils.
Horses and
Oh,
lizards.
there's so much fun. Okay.
Well, Maggie, once again, thank you for spending the time with us this afternoon. Thank you all for listening. Want to let you know that this is just one of many programs we're offering currently, 3 a week during the Stay Home with Leica campaign. And the next one will be this Thursday with Stefan Vanasco, talking about his creative process, specifically getting into his process for printing. And that will be 4 o'clock this Thursday. Also coming up this Saturday, you want to tune in to all of the Leica stores and galleries on Instagram. And starting roughly about 1 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern, running all afternoon, there will be Instagram live interviews. And lastly, reminder of our photo challenge that goes through this Saturday.
Yes.
Stay home with Leica. Show us how you are being creative at home. We will repost your images, and one winner will be selected on April 18th. And as you start to be creative at home and you want to look for more inspiration, this is the link to go to find out about all of our plans. A new set of lectures each week. Usually announced, let me think here, usually announced on the Friday before the next week. Maggie, thank you. Thank you all for listening. That's all for now. Stay well, everyone. We'll see you again next time.
Yay. Mwah.